Here's the deal. This year, state governments from across Australia, as Ben has touched on, will update the animal welfare standards and guidelines for poultry. There will be a perspective brought to this debate by farmers, and there will be a perspective brought to this debate by activist groups. And at the end of this process, it will be the role of government to decide where we land. Farmers will be supporting a move from a voluntary model code of practice towards an outcomes-based set of standards which will be both codified in law and enforceable. The activist movement will be calling for a ban on caged egg production. Now, I've worked on animal welfare as long as I've worked in agriculture, and I'm coming to terms with the fact that it's not a problem that you can solve. It's just an issue that you need to keep dealing with. To use the road analogy, which is the title of today's speech, the rugged road, you've got to keep the car between the lines, you've got to be mindful of the frequent potholes, you've got to expect the bumps. In fact, you've got to try and enjoy the bumps because they're never going to stop. You've got to keep your high beams on, and most of all, you've got to try not to be derailed by the crazy dude in the opposite lane who's trying to get your car off the road. Now, I could talk about the longer journey, or I could wax lyrical about social licence, but I figured it might be useful today to just kind of have a yarn about why the road is rugged in a very practical and immediate sense. And the road is rugged because there's a sideshow emerging, which is distracting attention from the main game of performance. The sideshow has a lot of colour and movement, but its central thesis goes something like this. The process is deficient and the debate is uninformed. Agricultural departments can't be trusted and the science is completely flawed. Now, as a result of these factors, it is argued we should ignore this move from a voluntary code towards a codified set of standards and guidelines and just ban caged egg production altogether. That's the sideshow. It's also the thesis that is put forward by the activist sector, and I suggest to you today that it bears some scrutiny. Now, I want to be clear, in spite of how I might sound, that this isn't about me having a gripe. The sideshow bears scrutiny because activist organisations are recognised players in the process of animal welfare reform. They get a ticket and they get a seat at the table. And if I'm required to defend what egg farmers stand for, so too should their beliefs and their strategies be held up to the light. So I want to make a point today of talking about the very things that the activist movement is going to be talking about this year. So here's what I'm going to talk about. The process, or more specifically, the nature of the debate, agricultural departments, and whether or not they should retain control of setting animal welfare policy, and the science, or more specifically, its selective use. So, firstly, to the nature of the debate. The general gist of this part of the thesis is that the process just lacks rigour. The debate is completely uninformed, and if only everyone knew how horrible all my egg farming members were, then change could be achieved. That's one way of describing the debate, and it's certainly a way that activists generally try to define the debate. But here's another take on it. Since joining the egg industry full-time last year, I've enjoyed having a debate about eggs with pretty much anyone who is willing. I'm dead set becoming very bad company at parties. One of the questions I particularly enjoy springing on the uninitiated is, did you know that in Australia we eat 13 million eggs a day? Now, there is not one single person that has replied to that question with, yeah, it sounds about right. It is almost always met with surprise. Interestingly too, it's one of the more benign surprises that I reveal about egg farming at barbecues, though none of the more controversial ones are any less factual. Like, for example, did you know that cages are the cleanest swine production? That they have the lowest rates of disease? That hens are omnivores and don't mind having a peck at each other? And I won't mention the unique challenges presented to the industry as we continue to deal with the oral fecal cycle. Hope you're enjoying your lunch. I get that the oral fecal cycle is surprising, but it's kind of weird to me that everyone feels affronted when they hear that there are actually benefits for caged egg production. But when I think about it, I shouldn't be surprised. Because to be fair to my barbecue friends and their knowledge base, they don't come to these conclusions in a vacuum. They don't come to these conclusions just on their own. They come to these conclusions because there has been a consistent and relentless misrepresentation of what farming looks like and what farming is, particularly with respect to eggs. Even though they're the cleanest form of production, they're represented as filthy. Even though they provide a range of benefits, they're derided as cruel and arcane. Now, in the broad, I'd say criticism is useful. If you're not being challenged as an industry, then you're not being held to account. But this isn't criticism in search of accountability. It's a campaign. And that in itself is one of the most significant features of the forthcoming debate. And that is, this ain't going to be a debate at all. It's a campaign. Now, like any campaign, it will be fierce and political. Notably too, I would argue, it will be cast at the fringes of ideology. Now, again, I want to be clear here that this is an observation and not a criticism. I'm not asking everyone to love caged eggs, and I'm not asking for a halt to campaigning. Of course there will be a campaign. It's a cornerstone of democracy. I'm simply asking everyone to just recognise what is going on here. This won't be above the public debate. This won't be a detailed consultation. It will be simplified and exaggerated, and you won't get drowned out by a rush of the facts. This is going to be a campaign, the agriculture sector will be mischaracterised, and everyone should just be aware that this is the road that we're travelling. You will not be reading gospel on the side of a billboard. You won't find the truth on the back of a taxi. And this isn't going to be a discussion that is held at the sensible centre of political dialogue, generally where good decisions are made. So, on the first part of the activist thesis, which argues that the nature of the forthcoming debate has in some way been made deficient or uninformed, should they argue, again, that the public simply doesn't understand enough about the realities of farming, then on that allegation, it is entirely possible that I would completely agree. Something else you'll continue to hear a lot about in the coming year is the suggestion that animal welfare shouldn't be regulated by departments of agriculture. The thinking behind this push goes something like this. Agricultural departments are geared to make primary industries more productive and more profitable. Productivity and profitability are in direct conflict with good animal welfare outcomes. The design of animal welfare policy should therefore be taken away from departments of agriculture and instead be given to statutory authorities. Now, before I dive into an assessment of what is wrong with this idea, let's briefly discuss what I consider to be right with the current regulatory framework, where departments of agriculture are responsible and involved in the setting of animal welfare regulation. Firstly, I can't surprise any departmental representative with my fun fact that we eat 13 million eggs a day. If I tried to, I'd look like a dill, and they'd probably correct me to the second decimal point. I'm also deprived of my pleasure of testing whether they understand the advantages and disadvantages of caged egg systems. They tend to know more than I do. Moreover, you never mention the oral fecal cycle for sheer fear that you'll end up in a detailed conversation about how the industry should best manage animals that eat matter that they've just discharged. The divide and dislocation that is borne out in my metropolitan barbecue stoppers is deprived of me when I converse with people who understand the sector. And I'd submit to you that this benefit is immeasurable. Do we want people making regulation that understand the complexity of agricultural production, or should we outsource it to a statutory authority with no mandate for real-life, boots-on-the-ground industry experience? Do we want to lean on that experience? Do we want to utilise it as a ballast for what I would warn is an incoming campaign that will be fought on the fringes of thought? I'd argue that we should. Now, that's the argument in favour of the current system. Let's just touch on the more significant failings of the argument we face. That this change in the structure of our regulations is necessary for appropriate animal welfare reform. So the principles, again, of this argument go something like this. Firstly, productivity and profitability are in direct conflict with good animal welfare outcomes. Secondly, the design of animal welfare policy should be taken away from departments of agriculture and given to statutory authorities. Now, the first pillar of this argument, I don't much disagree with. Departments of agriculture certainly have a role to play in making the sector more profitable and more productive. Of course they do. Their mandate is to ensure our industries can feed our growing nation. They want profitability and sustainability in their sector because they have incredibly important roles to play, which include, stuff like food security. It's given and it's appropriate, and it's the way we expect departments to work. Now, the second part of this argument is slightly more nuanced, but no less ridiculous, and it posits that productivity and profitability, some of the central pursuits of agricultural departments, are inconsistent with the setting of animal welfare regulations. So let's unpack that. The way this argument is usually couched is to oversimplify the concepts of both productivity and profitability. Productivity is articulated in its crudest form as a rate of output per unit of input. Profitability is described as the state of squeezing additional value, margin, or financial gain from the same or similar units. Importantly, each of these definitions is framed with reference to the animal welfare practices that are in the crosshairs of the activist sector. So to use these terms in the context of the current issue of the caged egg debate is to argue this. Departments don't want to transition out of cages because in the formulation of rate of output per unit of input, you, the farmer, would be making less by doing more and therefore being less productive and through that less profitable. Now, that's a pretty wacky idea to me, and the only way I can make it work in my head is if I completely disregard the disciplines of economics, competition, and the market in general. Despite all the conjecture of animal welfare being off the mark in the egg industry, I'd argue that egg farmers are the leading supply chain in advancing animal welfare through market-based mechanisms. Think about it. You go to a supermarket, you can choose to buy one of 4 or 5 varieties of eggs. There isn't a great deal of difference between the nutritional value of each of those different eggs, but there is a significant difference between the production systems used to produce them and, of course, the price that consumers pay. In effect, the egg industry has priced one element of animal welfare: confinement. Cafes, mayonnaise, all sorts of things and places are now labelling the use of free-range eggs. Our pricing of confinement is now almost as ubiquitous as eggs are themselves. And we're leaders in this field. I challenge any other supply chain to match our responsiveness to consumer demand. Has anyone in this room ever had a grass-fed sausage roll? Ever asked Mum if the lamb roast was free range? Ever asked the bartender for some free range pork crackling to go with your beer? I would argue probably not, but I'm happy to be surprised. So in saying that, let me loop back here to the thesis that agricultural departments are too concerned with profitability and have an inherent conflict of interest in policing animal welfare. Well, how about just no? In the financial year 2016, free-range eggs made up a tick over 40% of the supermarket volume, but they accounted for 50% of the value. Now, if you stick that single statistic inside this proposal, you get a department that is chomping at the bit to get every single farmer into higher spec free range. So what I'd put to you is that this theory doesn't bear scrutiny as a valid argument for regulatory failure, and yet you'll hear a lot of it this year. It doesn't make sense as a shortcoming of government, and it doesn't make sense as a criticism of this important process. It does, however, make sense in other ways. If I was, for example, part of the activist movement, and I was looking at what my key impediments were to achieving my goals, I would certainly put departments of agriculture right in the frame, and I'd dead set try to knock them off. The reason I would do this is basically because they aren't much fun at barbecues. They don't do shock and surprise the way our urban brothers and sisters do. And it's that shock and surprise that the activist movement relies upon. It's a lifeblood. Departments of agriculture understand the complexities of the sector. They aren't shocked that caged infrastructure has its benefits. They get the fact that intensive production was an innovation and not an evil. And in addition to that, they acknowledge, support, and foster the developments of new markets, including value-added animal welfare products. And in the overheated environment of animal welfare debates, I would argue that we need these departmental relationships more than ever. And I'm completely unsurprised that our opponents would seek to knock them off. Now, of course, the third part of the general activist thesis is that the science is flawed. And I want to touch incredibly briefly on this last claim put forward by those on the wrong side of the rugged road, but I'll try not to labour it too long. Some of you would have seen recent media articles decrying the lack of science in the current setting of the new standards and guidelines for poultry. Indeed, the calls for a, quote, independent scientific review to inform the standards has been a constant refrain of the activist sector, and it will only get louder as the year goes on. Look, I'm not a scientist, and this is incredibly complex stuff, so I'm not going to try and simplify it or distill it for you here. Suffice to say, though, what I will submit is that there is a range of science. Science that is usually quoted by people like me, industry representatives in forums like this, include work by Dr. Jeff Downing, who sought to demonstrate that caged hens have no difference to free-range hens in the amount of stress or happiness they experience. Other research, converse research, would demonstrate that hens experience frustration at not being able to undertake activities such as perching or dust bathing or access to anesthetizers. And importantly, these are things that aren't provided in conventional cages. Some of those studies that I could talk about show that hens demonstrate both motivation in order to access the positive experiences, but that they don't necessarily show frustration if they don't have access to them to begin with. And here we sort of get lost in the philosophical component of science. We could do a whole spot here on the rugged road to scientific agreement, but I reckon that's a pretty cold ticket. What I'd suggest is the primary function, or at least a useful function, of animal welfare science, at least right now, is to frame the issue for you and give you the capacity to make an informed decision about what you care about. Like, how do I feel about confinement? Do I value cleanliness and health over limited mobility? Do I think a bird should have a perch? Does it matter to me that freedom of movement is restricted? What are my thoughts on antibiotic use? These are all good questions, and the science can help you find different perspectives and accounts, but ultimately, it's a question that everyone has to find an answer to themselves.